Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for being here in our session today. We're really happy to have you here.
Yeah, we're really excited to talk to you about how to be an ally and advocate for all members of the LGBTQIA plus community.
And one thing we'll ask before we really dive in is for you to take a moment to just think about what you hope to learn in this session. Why did you sign up for this particular session? What do you hope to get out of it? Our plan is to present for about a half an hour and share some really important information with you. And then we want to open it up for questions and answers. So want to kind of just plant that seed to think about what you really want to know. And maybe we'll answer those questions as we present. And maybe there are things you want to be ready to ask us when we get to Q&A.
So we'll start with a quick introduction. My name is Jackie Thornhill. I'm here with my mom. I'm 23 years old. I live in San Francisco. I graduated from the University of San Francisco here, and I've been a public servant and political organizer for the past few years.
And I'm Bridget Sampson. I'm Jackie's mom, and I have a coaching, training, and consulting business called Sampson Coaching and Consulting. I was so honored to present yesterday at this conference to present I Am Remarkable, which I'm a facilitator for. So I do a lot of leadership and communication training. I'm a TEDx speaker. I'm the host of 2 different podcasts. And Jackie and I founded Transgender School together. So we're very proud of that. And this is our Transgender School logo and our mission. And that's what we're here to share with you today. And I also want to share that I am an emeritus professor emeritus of communication studies at California State University, Northridge. So I know most of you are in Indiana on East Coast time. For Jackie and me, we are in California, different ends of California, and we're on West Coast time. So very happy to be with you today. And to add to our introduction, we're going to share a little more about ourselves that we might not normally share, but that's relevant to this conversation that we're having with you today. And so I am the proud mom of 2 daughters, Jackie and her sister Joanna, and I've been married to their dad for 27 years. And I am a cisgender, which means not transgender, heterosexual, middle-aged woman. And a fun fact that we would definitely not share is that something, but that's relevant, that Jackie and I have in common is that we are both women on estrogen, me for menopause and her for her transgender transition.
So in addition to everything else I already told you about myself, I also identify as a transgender bisexual woman.
And so I am the proud mother of a transgender bisexual woman, in addition to everything else I've shared. And we just want to share with you, as we have the slide up about Transgender School, that we just founded it within the last few months. And we have a really supportive, growing community that we would love for you to be a part of. If you're interested, we are on Instagram, we're on Facebook, we're on Medium and YouTube. We have a podcast called Transgender School Podcast, where we have 2 episodes out, and we'll be putting out episodes out every month. And we're really finding that a lot of people want to understand and educate themselves and become allies. So we're really happy about that. And we want to share that with you. And we would love for you to visit our website, which is transgenderschool.org. And we'll make sure to put that link in the chat for you. We do courses regularly and have lots of offerings and live streams on Facebook, lots that's already recorded. If you want more after this short session, it's out there.
So today we're going to keep it relatively quick. We'll share my coming out story. We'll share some definitions and terminology that you may already know, but some of which you may not. And we'll share our top tips for being inclusive and an ally.
All right, so we are going to go ahead and dive in, and I'm going to start back at the very beginning for Jackie and myself, which is almost 24 years ago now. I gave birth to Jackie on Mother's Day, which was the day I became a mother in 1997, May 11, and Jackie was a true Taurus and always has been. She did not want to come out, and so it was a long, hard labor, and eventually someone named Maria was called into the room, and she climbed on top of me with her entire body weight to push Jackie out of me. And Jackie came out kicking and screaming, not very happy. And she just was not a happy baby. And I sometimes to this day wonder if maybe she then that the rest of us wouldn't know for many years.
So I don't know how much I actually knew as a baby, but I did have a very privileged, sheltered upbringing overall. I was Definitely the kind of kid who didn't just follow orders without question, though. I needed an explanation for everything. Thankfully, my parents believed in helping me see the why behind most of their demands, but there were many debates and battles. But there was also a lot of love, a lot of fun vacations, playing games, family time. But there was always one thing I just never knew how to express, didn't feel like I could share. I hated my body, didn't identify with the role I was assigned. Nothing about being a man or a boy ever appealed to me. I didn't have words for it. I didn't know if I was the only person who felt this way or everybody felt this way, but nobody talked about it. I had no concept of what it is to be transgender. So did what seemed like my only option at the time. I just faked it and ignored my feelings for as long as I could.
And I had no idea that any of this was going on. As parents, we think we know our kids, but I had no idea that that's what Jackie was experiencing. And as she grew older and she went into her teenage years, I just really thought that she was an angry, rebellious, depressed teenager and didn't know what was going on.
So I still didn't know the term gender dysphoria then. Now I know that's the technical term for that feeling I've always had that I kind of lost a coin flip when I was born. But my therapist explained gender dysphoria like the volume dial on a radio. You might start off in the beginning of your life and it's turned all the way down, kind of a barely audible whisper or white noise in the background. But for a lot of transgender people, myself included, over the course of your life, that dial just gets turned gradually up until it becomes unbearable, overwhelming. And the only solution in this analogy for myself and many other transgender people is to transition, usually via surgery, social transition, hormone replacement therapy, some combination of the three. But it's also important to point out that while dysphoria is an important part of many trans people's lives, it's a really painful experience. A lot of us would prefer not to discuss, and you should always respect that. It's also not a prerequisite for being transgender, and it's up to each individual trans person to define their own experience and identity. I can only speak definitively for myself.
And Jackie never felt safe enough to come out to us in her younger years. She came out as transgender to me at 19 years old, close to 20 years old. And so I had a really hard time believing it. I made a lot of mistakes in the beginning that I deeply regret now. I challenged her, I questioned her knowing that she is a woman. And even though, ironically, I was a university professor teaching in communication studies, and I taught courses and lectures on gender diversity, on sexual orientation diversity. I thought I was educated. I saw myself as an ally, but I was mistaken when it came to my own child. And we had never talked in our family about transgender people. We had gay and lesbian friends and family members, and we just never talked to our kids about the fact that some people are transgender and kind of open the space for them to ever share with us that that might be their experience. So we never did that, right? And so it took Jackie 20 or almost 20 years to really learn and develop the language to explain to us what she was feeling and what she was experiencing. And so Jackie actually, after she came out to us about 5 months later, came out to the world on Facebook. Here we are in the world of social media, as you all know. And so Facebook was a pretty convenient way for her to tell everyone in her life that she is transgender, she's transitioning, she's coming out. So this is the actual post. We have record of it, of course, from Facebook. And I'd like to draw your attention to how she talks about sparing her the emotional labor of having to explain one-on-one to everyone in her life. And this is something that we really want to reinforce for all LGBTQIA plus people. We don't have the right to demand of them to speak for their entire community, or they don't have the obligation to share with anyone their experience and their feelings if they don't feel comfortable doing so. So I actually loved how Jackie said, you know, if you want to know what it means to be transgender, Google it. There's lots of information out there. And if you think you should have known sooner, you know, I'm sorry, but this is my experience. And I was really proud of her for sharing it in that way. But I was also also, to be honest, very nervous and scared about what people's reactions would be. We do live in a transphobic world. And so I was concerned for her safety, for her well-being. And as her mother, it was really important for me to see what actually happened that day, that many, many people liked the post and were very, very supportive. And so about 10 days later, I flew from my home in Los Angeles to her home in San Francisco because I had to be with her. I couldn't take it. I wanted to have this experience of being with Jackie as Jackie, knowing that she is a woman and she's now presenting as her true self. So I flew to San Francisco and we had this amazing mother-daughter day, all the stereotypical things. I convinced her to go with me to get her first manicure and to go shopping together for women's clothes. And we had lunch and she took me to City Hall where she was an intern at the time in San Francisco. And it was actually a really beautiful day. And I'll always remember that moment. And so it went on from there. And over the 4 years since Jackie came out, we have really come a long way in mostly in my education of learning how to support my child and educating my partner, my spouse, Jackie's dad, and coming around to learning, joining support groups, being volunteers in our support group, and educating others, which is why Jackie and I more recently started Transgender School. So here's us at a Pride parade a little over a year after she came out, and we've since been to a couple Pride events together, and even Jackie, our Pride experience, and Jackie especially's Pride experience, was documented in a beautiful documentary called State of Pride, which you can watch on YouTube if you like. So I highly recommend that.
So before we get into all the definitions, we want to make an important point, which is that the truth is this is not a completely unified community, and assuming it is would be problematic and just incorrect. The voices of the LGBTQIA plus community are those who speak out, which are a small percentage of the total. Many in the community just want to live their lives in peace and be who they are. There are many queer people with experiences and views as diverse as what we would see among the entire population of human beings. But there's this assumed camaraderie and connection, which doesn't necessarily exist in a lot of cases. For example, in our Transgender School Facebook group, which has over 500 members, there are often really heated debates amongst trans people, trans allies, and other queer people about political issues, religion, language, politics, and a lot more. So there are really as many different identities and ideologies as there are individuals who identify as members of the queer community. And many queer people did not and would not choose to be the hot topic for conferences or diversity training. A lot of us don't want to see ourselves in the news constantly as congressional representatives fight over flags and signs in front of their offices and state legislatures fight over our basic rights, but we're forced to. We didn't really choose any of this. So let's just keep that in mind as we continue this conversation and as you interact with transgender and queer people in your life. There's even a lot of disagreement about whether it should just be LGBTQ, LGBT, TLGB, or the IA should even be included. So as we go through the definitions, we want you to view them as fluid, not as a spectrum, but more as ever-changing and morphing and not fixed. So there are queer people who are liberal, there are queer people who are conservative, there are queer people who are devoutly religious, members of every faith in the world, and queer people who've been deeply harmed by religion and feel that religious people use their power to erase their existence. There are non-binary trans people who believe that gender roles are outdated and want to do away with them, but there are also some trans people who want nothing more than to fit into a binary gender role, just not the sex they were assigned at birth. So we'll clarify some of those differences and issues as we go through exploring the LGBTQIA plus acronym now.
And again, we will take questions at the end. So we're going to go through all of these definitions and ideas, and then we really want to hear your questions after we share what we have to share with you. So I'm going to start with sexual orientation. And the first thing I want to say about this is it's really important to use the term sexual orientation, not sexual preference, because think about it, sexual preference implies that it's a choice, and it is not a choice. So we always want to say sexual orientation. I also want to specify that sexual orientation is defined as who a person is attracted to, which can be sexual attraction and or emotional attraction and or romantic attraction. And those three are different. And cishet people, which I am, cisgender, heterosexual, often confuse those and think they all go together, and they don't. So that's the first thing we really want you to be aware of. So let's go ahead and go out of order and break the rules by starting with the A, which is asexual. So asexual individuals, people who identify as asexual, can have or may have emotional and romantic attraction and connection to other people, but they don't have sexual feelings. Okay. So there are many asexual people, and I know of many asexual people who are in loving, committed relationships, but don't have any kind of sexual relations with their partner. So important to understand that. There are also people who may have close, loving relationships with people in their lives, yet are not interested or not attracted in any way to others in a sexual, romantic, or partnership kind of way. And so it's really important to understand that there's so much diversity within each of these letters, right? And there's this tendency, as Jackie said, I just want to reemphasize, to try to lump people together. But you could take each letter of this acronym and show how diverse it is even within the letter. So to the LGB part of the acronym, we tend to kind of be familiar with those words, right? So lesbians tend to be women who are attracted to other women. Gay men primarily identify as men who are attracted to men, but many lesbian women and bisexual individuals will also refer to themselves as gay. And the point here is that everybody gets to self-define and self-identify, and we need to respect how they choose to identify themselves. Bisexual people are attracted to people regardless of their gender. And again, all of this is really, really fluid. And I'm going to use myself as an example for the first time ever publicly. I am 27. I've been married to a man for 27 years, and we share romantic, sexual, and emotional attraction to each other. But I have also been romantically and sexually attracted to women and have had experiences with women on the romantic and sexual level. So where do I fall? If it's a spectrum, which I think the whole idea of a spectrum, while people think it's evolved, is kind of problematic, because if it's a spectrum of 1 to 100, where am I? 92.8, can we just like see it all as fluid, and that anybody could be attracted to anyone in any way because of the complex nature of attraction between two individuals. And that, ideally these labels could be much more inclusive. So that's a very brief intro to sexual orientation, and I'll leave it there to turn it over to Jackie to talk about transgender.
Now I'll define some terminology around gender identity. Being transgender generally means you don't identify with the sex you were assigned at birth. That could include someone who was assigned male physiology at birth who identifies as a woman, which is my experience. And I'm generally pretty binary for the most part. I'm a woman. I use she, her, hers pronouns, but I'm not in other ways. I'm not super into makeup and dresses. And a lot of people, trans and cis, want to gatekeep trans women by nudging us to work harder, present as more feminine, work harder to pass, work on our voice, wear more makeup, have certain surgeries, or do all those things. But it's really up to us. And being transgender can also mean pretty much the reverse. You are assigned female physiology at birth, identify as male. Non-binary people often don't identify with either gender completely. And again, it can be kind of a range. It's often not fixed. Some non-binary people lean toward masculine or feminine in their presentation, in their identity, which don't necessarily correlate, or they may say they are in the middle somewhere. It's really up to them. Gender fluid generally means that you don't have a fixed sense of your gender. Gender queer is a similar term that's often applied to a broad variety of ways of identifying and presenting oneself that don't fit within the binary constructs of male and female. And one thing that I really want to point out that's important to me is that a lot of people want to legitimize being trans with science, saying it's like some gene or some part of our brain that you can point to, or biology. And while there is a lot of emerging research, I don't need the science, because I don't think we should predicate our arguments for our rights on scientific research. I think that that's a dangerous road to go down and could just become another way to lump us together or gatekeep certain people from access to medical care. Like, what if I have the trans gene, but someone else who identifies as trans doesn't have it? Do they not get access to medical care to transition? Do they not get to define their own identity? So I think it should be enough just for trans people to say they identify as trans. I don't think people generally say they don't identify as trans if they don't feel that way. Cisgender people don't have to prove with scientific studies that they're the gender they say they are. So again, don't really see why trans people should have to. And intersex is an umbrella term that describes pretty much anyone born with a body that falls outside of that male-female binary. This may mean that their reproductive or sexual anatomy doesn't neatly fit into the box of male or female. So there is a question of whether intersex people should be included in the acronym because their experience is definitely different than a lot of other people in the community. Sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't. Personally, I think they should get to decide. Again, I try to lean toward allowing people to define their own identity experience. I don't think there's a lot of cases where they shouldn't be allowed to. So one of the most controversial issues is when parents and doctors make a decision for an intersex baby. This is really not right because they will often decide to perform surgery on a baby who has no say in the matter, hasn't had a chance to articulate a gender identity or a preferred gender, a preferred physical biology yet. But thankfully, many parents of intersex babies are increasingly realizing that the best thing to do is wait for the child to grow up, express their own gender identity, and if they want to have certain surgeries, they can, but they don't have to. So queer is another umbrella term for people who don't fully identify as cisgender or heterosexual and have their own individual way of seeing and presenting their gender or sexual orientation. Many younger people, such as myself, use the term queer as kind of a catch-all because we don't fully identify with traditional social constructs about gender or sexuality. And as time goes on, I would predict that more and more people are going to identify as queer. Queer identities can be and often are intersectional. For example, I identify as bisexual and trans, and I often refer to myself as queer. It's also important to recognize that there is intersectionality around a lot of identities, particularly race, class, and culture that are really important in defining our lived experiences. For example, trans women of color, trans women who are undocumented, and trans women living in poverty are having a very different life experience than I am in general. They are facing multiple intersecting forms of marginalization and discrimination that I just don't experience as an economically privileged white transgender woman.
So we're about to transition into our top recommendations for being an ally to people of the LGBTQIA plus community, and that applies to all of us. So even if you identify with maybe one or more of the letters in the acronym, we all still need to work to be better allies to each other, regardless of how we identify, right? So we're going to talk about our model for being an ally, which we created for transgender school, and we put a lot of work into, and we recently shared in a whole series of webinars that we did in our community. And so I want to let you know that we're going to give you the handout for that, the link to a handout for that we can share with you at the end. So we'll put that into the chat, but just go ahead and follow along with us for now. And I'll go back to our slides so that we can show you our wonderful ally acronym, which we were pretty excited. Here's back to us at Pride. And we were pretty excited when we realized that ALLY itself makes a great acronym: affirm, listen, love, and yield. And this is for everyone. Yes, I'm speaking as a parent ally, but we know that many of you are students, professors, as I was a professor and had many students come out to me and where I had the opportunity to be an ally. Some of you are in healthcare, a variety of fields, STEM fields, right? Where they're really, there's education and allyship needed everywhere. It's desperately needed right now. People are not informed enough. So please take in our ally acronym and share it as widely as you can. And that's why we're sharing the handout with you, where all of this description will be something that you can download and take with you and share as well. So the first letter of the ally acronym, of course, is to affirm. So Jackie's going to talk about that.
So you should affirm whether you're the colleague, student, classmate, or even family member or friend of an LGBTQIA plus person. Be sure to affirm their identity, name, and pronouns in any conversation. If someone lets you know that their name or pronouns have changed, make sure to get on board and use them right away. Don't question or challenge or resist. That means using affirming language 100% of the time, whether the person's present in the room or not. Affirming and inclusive language includes partner or spouse versus husband or wife, and using your pronouns in a Zoom meeting, like most of us in this meeting are, or on your LinkedIn profile or name tag or email signature. These all help trans people know that you're an ally, that you're probably safe. But not necessarily always, because it takes a lot more than that to just be an ally. So if you're a professor or a leader in an organization, make sure to affirm students' names and pronouns ahead of time. For example, my mom's a retired professor, and she used to send an email to all her students ahead of each semester to check in, get to know them, and make sure she knew their correct name and pronouns. It's important not to say that the person used to be male, changed genders, used to be straight, used to be attracted to that gender. Affirm their identity and sexual orientation as they express it in the past, present, and future whenever you're talking about them. Um, they're just now living openly as the gender and sexual orientation that they are, even if they described themselves differently in the past. So we'll go through some quick do's and don'ts for affirm. As we've said, use the correct terminology, names, and pronouns. Affirming means past, present, future. Affirming means not challenging people's lived experience because they know better about their own lives than you do. Affirming a transgender person's decisions about transitioning, and always affirming your support, care, or love for this person with kind words. And a few really important don'ts: don't challenge anything they share with you about their identity. Don't try to talk someone out of transitioning or dating someone or anything like that. Don't try to out a queer person unless they ask you to. Don't suggest it's a phase, mental illness, confusion, or a result of trauma. That's one of the most common and misinformed things that people say. And as these statistics highlight, affirming transgender youth's name and pronouns, especially if you're a family member or loved one, sibling even, can often be a matter of life or death. So please, please continue to affirm.
Yeah, and I just want to say again that when Jackie first came out to us, her family, we did not, it took us a little while. We weren't entirely affirming, and we deeply regret that and realize that that wasn't the right thing to do. And I now do intake calls for our support group, and I do lots of conversations, even outside of the support group, with parents and family members and loved ones of trans youth. And I cannot emphasize enough how important what Jackie shared is. It is definitely a life or death matter. Just use people's pronouns, use their name, get on board, and there's really no reason not to. So the next letter of the acronym is listen. And so we just want to emphasize how important it is to just be a truly active, engaged listener. If someone comes out to you, whoever they are, if it's your student, your colleague, and they share this with you and they trust you enough to share, just be an active listener. Just be a good listener. Don't challenge, honor what they share. Keep everything confidential. Don't tell anybody else, anyone else on the team or in the group or in the class, whatever it may be. Ask permission before asking about sensitive topics, right? If you're listening, when someone comes out to you, the only things to really say are, how can I support you? And thank you for trusting me enough to share this with me. So when I was teaching at the university, many students came out to me over the years and shared with me that they did not feel safe to come out, whether it be any aspect of their identity, with their families, with their professors, in the programs that they were in on campus. And so let's please be that safe person who will just truly listen and hold the space for someone to safely come out and share their identity. This is my model as a communication professor that I shared for decades in the classroom and training programs for true listening. Tuning in, being fully present for someone, setting aside distractions and devices, reading all signs, being aware that nonverbal communication is 75 to 85% of communication. So being aware of people's facial expressions, their body language, what are they conveying outside of the words that they're speaking? Understanding from their point of view. When Jackie first came out, for me, it was all about my concerns, my worries. How is it going to affect me? How was I going to tell friends and family? And now looking back, I needed to work harder to understand from her point of view. What is it like to come to terms with the reality that you are transgender, that you've suppressed it and denied it and didn't know how to express it for all years till 19. I needed to work harder to understand from her point of view. That is what being a true ally means. And then not just understanding, but expressing that understanding with empathy, being able to say, I get it. I understand. I'm really trying to understand. This is how you're telling me you feel. You are a woman. You know you are a woman. Tell me more. You can trust me. That's empathy, right? Not challenging. So, final word on listening would be listening don'ts, okay? Being really careful to practice active listening, not interrupting. These are good listening skills for any conversation. But now that I've had so many conversations with LGBTQIA individuals who really need that safe space and that trust, it's even more important to stay away from these. Please don't just listen to find opportunities to challenge or ever to use something that was shared against someone later. Don't demand consistency. I hear this so much with parents and teachers and everyone saying, but they said this was their name or they said this was their identity. And now they're, well, you know what? We all change as we grow and get more in touch with ourselves, don't we? And we define things differently. So give the person space to discover who they are and to express it in different ways over time if things change for them. And there's nothing more to say other than I support you and I thank you for trusting me. So moving on to love. Jackie will
Yeah,
talk
so the
about love.
next letter of our acronym is L for love. If this is a family member, someone close especially, please work to feel and express truly unconditional love. The change may be hard for you, but trust me, it's harder for them. So don't put your issues on them. Get support for yourself. And if it's a colleague, student, or friend, just try to come from a spirit of love as much as you can, even if you don't literally love that person. But if you do love the person, tell them. And if it's a spouse, you don't have to stop loving them instantly because they come out to you. Even if you're not going to end up staying with them, you can still love them. And it's really important to make a conscious effort to be compassionate, kind, and see things from the point of view of the queer person. I can tell you from experience, it's really hard to come out. And none of the people I first came out to were supportive or loving, which made it one of the hardest experiences of my life. So love the people in your life enough to get educated, even if you don't think any of them are queer, so that when they do come out to you, you'll be ready. And we're going to give you some quick do's and don'ts for love as well. Make sure to let the person know how much you love them. Communicate in a loving way. Don't criticize, don't challenge. Offer a hug, offer to wipe tears in a COVID safe way if you can, if appropriate. Share that you won't reveal anything with anyone unless given permission. Check in on them regularly. And the don'ts are also important to avoid. Really don't say cruel things. It sounds simple, but in the moment when emotions are high, we often say things we can't take back. So don't also use an angry tone of voice, threaten, or give ultimatums. Don't make it all about you. Again, that's something you might not realize you're doing in the moment, but is important to try to be aware of. And please, as an extension of that, don't make demands about what the person must do to meet your needs. If you are uncomfortable with this, try to say as little as possible. Try to stay affirming and get help for yourself. That's really the best thing you can do.
And the last letter of the acronym is Y, and we decided to make that yield, which is an incredibly important aspect of being an ally. Please yield to the person's choices, decisions, identifications, terminology, right? So don't give advice, please, even if you see yourself as a member of the community or in the same letter of the LGBTQIA acronym, the experience is different for everyone. So we need to completely yield to that individual's decisions about what's right for them, right? For transgender people, especially as Jackie has shared, there's so much resistance to allowing transgender people to be who they are, to present how they choose to present, to either choose certain medical treatments or surgeries or not, right? Especially even if you are a parent or a loved one or someone close to a transgender person, it's their choice, and the rest of us simply need to yield. Jackie can tell you, how much nicer it is probably now that I stopped telling her about wearing lipstick, right? She doesn't want to wear lipstick, right? So it took me a long time to yield. And now I realize how ridiculous, because I don't want anybody telling me what I should do with my body or my life or who I think I am, right? So let's yield the power to where it should rest with the individual to decide who they are and how they want to present. And the same goes for even if someone is underage, if they are a youth. Puberty blockers are reversible, completely reversible. This is a huge controversial issue, and we are totally supportive of puberty blockers because young people who are trying to figure out their identity may need that pause button to figure out what's going on for them, and we need to yield and support them. And the medical professionals in our communities support this as well. So, and in many cases, parents refuse to consent, or one parent will consent and one parent will not consent. And I really want to impart on all of you that this is incredibly important and definitely has been a life or death matter for many, many youth. So please always yield. The do's under yield are trust that someone knows what's best for them better than you do. Support a transgender person's decisions, provide access for all LGBTQ people for medical care and LGBTQIA, because we talked about the controversy for intersex people. It's their choice if they want medical interventions, healthcare, mental health care, provide consent if it's requested, immediately use pronouns. And I just want to say, you know, a quick personal example. I remember when Jackie first came out and it had been shared in a group, and a woman came up to me and she identified as a lesbian. And she said to me, you know, when I was a kid, I wanted to be a boy. And I'm so glad I realized it was just a phase. And now I know I'm a lesbian and I love women. And she clearly was making the case to me that that's the same for Jackie, that Jackie shouldn't be transitioning because she's going to change her mind at some point. And it really hurt me to have someone who identifies as part of the larger community say something so ignorant and so unaffirming and not, and about how I shouldn't yield, right? When that's, of course, what I should do as her mother. So please yield, and please don't think you know what's best for someone else. Deny a transgender person life-saving medical treatment. Don't ask people to wait to come out or to do what they need to do just to make you more comfortable or give you time. And please don't express dislike of any of that person's choices on their own identity, their partner, their name, their pronouns. Okay. So that is our acronym for being a true ally, whatever your role is: professor, colleague, counselor, family member, friend, spouse, anyone in an LGBTQIA person's life, is to be a true ally by practicing this acronym. And so we also want to remind you that we want to give you the handout. We want to just a little warning, not warning, but piece of information that this handout is going to look a little bit different than what we just shared with you, because we are a transgender school and most of the education that we do is around understanding transgender experiences and identity. So the ally acronym on the handout is going to be specifically relevant to being an ally to transgender people, but it's certainly generalizable. And we just changed a few words on it in the slides we use today so that it's all applicable to the broader LGBTQIA community. So Jackie just put the link to that handout. You can download it as a PDF. And also very much encourage you to go to transgenderschool.org because we have a ton of resources there. Jackie and I have Medium articles, many Medium articles. We have our YouTube page there. We have our live streams posted there, videos with all the members of our family sharing about their experience. So much that we've put out there, that we worked so hard to put out there to share much, much more than what we've been able to share in this session. So we hope you'll go and check us out on all of those platforms. We just want to say thank you so much. And with the rest of the time, we would love to answer your questions. So tell us what they are. Yeah, thank you. Nice small group here. So please feel free. Thank you for the hand claps.
Exactly 10 minutes left.
Yeah, so those who want to ask a question, feel free to just unmute and pop on. We're a nice small group, and let us know what your question is.
I can go. Thank you so much, y'all, for saying everything that you did. I know it's hard. It really is. And I commend both of you for your bravery, because I live in the Midwest and it's sometimes really scary here to be a queer person. And I identify as queer because I am still trying to understand how I feel and where I fall on the spectrum of things. But I'm curious if you have any suggestions for living in not necessarily an accepting environment, in the Midwest, and how you can talk to people. I work with a lot of coworkers who say, well, I watch RuPaul's Drag Race, so I'm accepting. And I just don't really believe that's the best way to be knowledgeable about your world. So I kind of want to have some resources to be able to talk to them, even if I don't talk about my own story, of how to just say like, this is important and you need to learn more.
Yeah, that Midwest nice is a double-edged sword if it's not genuine. But no, I think that's such a great question. And I wish there was like a really good answer. But I'm not gonna lie to you, like that there are certain areas of this country that are way more or less accepting. But I think it's important to stay in those areas and to fight for your rights there and to fight for your community there. And I think in most parts of the country, there is a queer community to some degree. So like the first thing I would always say is find your community, even if that just means like a small group of friends for you. You know, people who also identify as queer or LGBTQ. I would say that's the best thing you can do. And I think the first queer person was, I think, a lesbian woman elected to a city council in Michigan, maybe Ann Arbor or somewhere else. So, you know, the Midwest can surprise us once in a while. But no, it's a good question, and an important thing to point out is that unfortunately where you live is one of the biggest factors determining the culture that you're going to get in terms of acceptance.
Yeah, I would. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Rachel.
No, it's just that you know, being who I am and also being fortunate to be a part of several friends who have transitioned and I'm a part of their life still, you know, I hear a lot that people are scared and people are afraid of getting hurt. And that's terrifying, you know, and I just want to be supportive for those friends and those people in my life, but also like, I don't want to move because it's scary sometimes, you know, like you said, it's important to have a voice in a place that isn't as accepting. So thank you for helping.
Yeah, I just wanted to give a little to the part of your question about resources, Rachel, that on our website, transgenderschool.org, you can just click and we have a Google Doc that's ever changing and we're adding to that you can just get, you know, and you don't have to give us an email or anything. If anybody wants to be on our email list, we love that. And you can sign up through our website, but our resource document is available to everyone. And we have 15 pages of documentaries, videos, articles, TED Talks, everything you can imagine. It's all transgender specific because that's our kind of, you know, our niche. But, you know, I highly recommend PFLAG and also the Trevor Project for, you know, larger, more broad lists of fantastic and helpful resources, because you know, you kind of have to sift through and figure out what's relevant. When Jackie came out in our family, one of the things that we did was we picked some select resources, some videos and a couple articles to share with family members. And they really were willing. It kind of showed us if they were willing to read and watch what we asked them to, how supportive they were going to be. And we carefully selected what we thought would be relevant for them for wherever they seem to be coming from. So, you know, I would recommend, you know, it sounds like you're very knowledgeable and aware. And, you know, if you are familiar with all these resources that are out there and you sense that someone's open to it, you can always share a couple things that can really teach them a lot.
And one thing I can't help but point out as someone who's always been involved with politics is if you do live in a less accepting area, that makes it more likely you're going to be represented by a Republican or a more moderate Democrat. So it can never hurt, and it often helps a lot to write their offices, whether that's your state and local representatives or your federal representatives in the House or the Senate. Definitely make sure you know who those people are, you know how they're voting on LGBTQ rights issues at the state, local, and federal level, and try to advocate there, because policy goes a long way toward determining our culture as well.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you for the fantastic question, Rachel, and for sharing your experience as well. Who else has a question for us? We'd love to answer some more questions with 5 more minutes, and can go a couple minutes over if anybody else can. And you're welcome to write a question in the chat if it's more comfortable for you. I know some folks don't have their video on, and whatever works for you. Or maybe we answered all your questions.
Whenever I'm in a meeting at work, I'm like, oh, video off, especially if I haven't brushed my hair or anything like that.
Any other questions? Happy to answer, or comments based on anything we shared. We would love for you to, again, join our community. Our Facebook group is very diverse and active and very opinionated, which we love. People get into all kinds of conversations, and we post a lot. We post a lot of video clips of us teaching. We post a lot of facts and information and research and recommendations, and people really appreciate that and enjoy that. And Instagram, if you're more of an Instagram person, I'm not a Twitter person. Jackie does the Twitter posts, but you do a pretty good job keeping up there on Twitter. We have our Transgender School Twitter page too. Thank you, Claire, for saying that you enjoyed the talk and you appreciated our vulnerability and sharing our experiences. It can be hard to do, but we hope it helps people.
And I will plug something that we haven't put out yet, but if you do end up following us on social media, you'll see it when it comes out. We recently did a series of 3 digital courses. We're going to edit those into an evergreen course that'll be available online, super affordable price. And one thing, I won't spoil anything, but you can actually, in that course, it's a little bit longer, and you'll get to hear us reenact some conversations from when I initially came out to my mom. So that's a really helpful one if you find our handout helpful and if you're interested in learning more about being an ally to trans people specifically. And I do see we got a question. So a tip I normally follow is asking, what does that mean to you? Yeah, that's a great question. Great question to, like you said, allow people to explain their own lived experiences, and completely agree with that. Yeah, I wouldn't want anyone else to tell me what I am or am not allowed to identify as. So I'm not going to tell anyone else what they are or are not allowed to identify as.
Exactly. And people think that their experience is shared, even if, because they may identify in the same way, but it's different for each individual. So that yielding is really critical. And when we just, as Jackie said, we just did this series of webinars, that was the one that I got the most feedback on, especially from people who are close to LGBTQ people. It's like, oh yeah, I get it. Like it was really, really hard to yield, but now I see how important that is, because that's what we want. It doesn't matter how you identify. We want to make our own choices for ourselves, right? And so I also will just do a quick plug, and for a free webinar that Jackie and I are going to do, you may not know, but March 31st is Transgender Day of Visibility. So Jackie and I are going to be offering a special course. It's a little late for all of you on the East Coast because we have to do it in the evening after our work hours, but we're going to do it at 6:30 Pacific time. And we're going to share some really important key information that people need to know on Transgender Day of Visibility, a little more political, and some of the ways that transgender people are currently under attack, to really be in line with that Transgender Day of Visibility, where hopefully people who might not otherwise pay attention will want to tune in. So please be on the lookout for that on our website as well.
Yeah, definitely. If you're interested in learning about all the different pieces of legislation that are being considered and voted on in state legislatures across the country that affect, unfortunately, trans kids in particular, and all of the other ways transgender people are under attack, and you can help support us both at a policy level and through your actions every day, that's a really great opportunity to do that. So check us out on social media, and we'll have the event page up for that very soon. And thanks again, everyone, for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
And one more thing, since you're a university, really make sure that you're tapped into I don't know if you have some kind of a pride center. I taught at a university in California, and we had a super active pride center. And I brought to them, when I was still teaching, I wanted to have a big event on a screening of a documentary about a transgender woman and how she was estranged from her family, sadly. And it was an incredible event. I got lots of funding from different departments on campus and tons of support from the Pride Center and other campus organizations. And hundreds and hundreds of people came and were incredibly moved and learned a lot from it. So I really encourage you at the university to think about holding these kinds of events. Invite us as speakers as well. We're happy to do more speaking and share our story. And there's really great reception for those kinds of events. So since you're all part of the university community, I strongly encourage that. And if I can help you value in doing that, please reach out to, if we can help you, sorry, Jackie and I, if we can help you with that, please reach out to us. We would love to be part of anything that you want to do. Oh, okay, great. LGBT plus Culture Center. I love that. It always has a different name. So please support, walk in when we're back in person and just say, hey, how can I support what's happening here? And maybe you want to think about holding an event yourself. That would be fantastic. So thanks, everybody. I know you probably
Thanks
have other
again.
sessions, to get to. So did everybody get our handout? We want to make sure you got that.
I'll send the handout link again for anyone who missed it. That's
Yeah.
totally free. That's pretty much everything we covered in our last course. Thanks again for being here.
Yeah, and we'd love to have you follow us on social media and check out our website, transgenderschool.org. Thank you so much for inviting us to be here. And thank you for all the support and great comments today. Thank you.
And enjoy the rest of your weekend and the rest of the summit too.